Okay, YouTube's going live.
Cool. I am just trying to figure out why my thing is not loaded.
Which thing?
Oh, the tutorial stuff that the work that I did between now and then. It should be.
Ah, so you have a new post, but it's not on GitHub.
Yeah. Well, it's did I
It
not?
should be, but
Oh,
it's not.
that might help. As in, I committed it, but I didn't push it, so
Right.
it'll be a minute. But it's usually pretty quick. Yeah. So I had some. So I've been busy. Which is probably going to take another week or so to resolve, maybe a little bit more. Anyway, which has been, I don't know, a bit frustrating in some ways. But yeah. Anyway, but I've got a few hundred words down about just thoughts I was having while doing the impasse chain stuff, or reading the article, and then a tree that I made with commentary on Gavin stuff. I put not in all the options, no. In some of the options, I put a little checkbox there that hopefully resolves in the PDF. I've linked on. Yeah, they do. That just makes them a little bit easier to see. So down the bottom is the link to the tree, by the way.
Okay.
So one thing that I was thinking about, by the way, was whether my comments would be better as siblings or children of the relative thing I was commenting on. I left them as children because it was easier to see the relationship, but it makes it harder to read the commentary.
I think children make sense because they're about the thing that you're putting them under.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, should I look at the tree or the text first?
Let's go through the text first because that's about the essay, and then we can have a look at the tree.
Oh, the impasse chain essay. Got it. Yeah, what do you
Yeah.
think of the essay?
Yeah, so I think it's a good introduction to essentially like a caveat, or not a caveat, sorry, a part of paths forward, without necessarily being too like overly burdensome or things. It's also just interesting on its own. There were like I think there are maybe some bits that could use some more detail. Maybe there was I'm struggling to remember now. There was something minor that I didn't end up writing down. But other than that, yeah, I think it makes sense. Um, I think it's fairly accessible. I don't think there's going to be much of a problem with people understanding the ideas. Uh, and I think it's, yeah, well reasoned in the sense that I don't know of another methodology, and this is something that you can actually do in a repeated fashion. So the first section of my comments were about this idea of like a thing that people do that you didn't mention, like reframing the debate, or not reframing the debate, sorry, but like reframing a point or an explanation. Anyway, I list some problems with that, but that would be one alternative that I don't think was listed, but it's not codified particularly.
Yeah, you can certainly try more to clarify, and different words can help. That's it depends on the type of impasse. Clarifying helps if someone suspects a misunderstanding,
Mm.
which is a pretty common issue, but it's not universal. Sometimes like both parties think that they're understanding each other, they just really dislike what the other person's saying or something.
Yep. Yeah, the misunderstanding. So, I've got anyway. Point 2 that I make at the end of this section mentions that. Or I say miscommunication particularly, but yeah, in that I don't know of many other types of issues that would be resolved by that method. Like, yeah.
I think you could explain a blockchain without explaining what hashing and peer-to-peer networking are. Like, you wouldn't give every technical detail, but you could like try a different way to explain it that someone might understand.
So yeah, I like there's an analogy that I've heard that is in the next sentence. That I've heard like that it seems like a pretty good introductory type thing for someone, except that there's a whole bunch of stuff that it doesn't cover, and that's essentially why I listed those things. Is that to like fully understand the properties, I think that they're dependent on those concepts.
So theoretically, there's always different ways to explain or approach something. In practice, it can be hard to find other good ways. But what you can often do is find partial explanations and use several. So if you find that they're not understanding a particular part of blockchain, you can come up with a way of explaining that one thing without hashes, without worrying about completeness. And then you continue the conversation and you find that you're getting stuck on some other issue and you find a way of explaining just that one thing. And so if you
Yeah.
don't go for completeness, it's much easier to use alternative explanations.
So I talk about that a bit in the next paragraph. I don't like at that point in the like writing this section, I sort of felt like I was getting maybe a little bit off topic though. So I didn't expand as much as I could have, and I mentioned something and then get back to uh, the topic and move on.
Yeah, I was just disagreeing. The word need is very strong.
Oh, okay, yeah, yep. No, that's fair.
Yeah, if you think that this is just true like most of the time, just slightly rephrasing helps a lot. I think it's important to be careful with words that mean like all versus most.
Yep.
It's not necessarily a compromise. There's perfectly good reasons someone might want a partial different explanation. Like it could be more accessible to them and adequate to the purpose.
Yeah, okay. Um, yeah, I do have the feeling that I've sort of been a bit uh, selective, like in the sense that I'm talking about a smaller subset than what I've actually labeled, or at least relative to the things I have in mind. Um, yeah, but I agree that not everything. I mean, I think I actually mentioned earlier, like there's uh, like when I mentioned like Pythagoras's proofs of Pythagoras theorem, um, like that sort of contradicts the idea that explaining from a different point of view wasn't a replacement; it was a compromise.
Yeah, when you say compromise, I take you to mean that the explanation is inferior in some way, like misleading or causes trouble or something. I interpret it as something other than just incomplete. And there are a lot of analogies that are like that, where you're trying to do an analogy and it's easier and more accessible in some way, but it's also like wrong in some way.
Yeah.
You have a compromise between easier to understand but not actually right, gives the wrong answer sometimes. Whereas there are some explanations that do not give an answer for some things, but they're not actually misleading. So I don't see those as a compromise, it's just partial info. And so you can look for that type, preferably. Because I think those are often available, and people pick bad ones when they had better options. It helps not to be vague as well. When you say it's kind of like this, then often it's kind of like that in some ways and not others, and you're mixing them together. Whereas if you're more specific, it's easier to make the things you actually said be correct. Because you're controlling what you say better, instead of pointing in the general direction of a comparison.
Yep.
Regarding incrementally learning, thinking about children is helpful. Like if a 5-year-old asks you about blockchain, I think there are answers you could give him without teaching about hashes that would be useful and would be real progress, in the direction of him understanding it. That would just be incomplete but not actually misleading.
Yeah. So one thing that I think about kids and maths a bit with this, not just because that's a commonish topic, but when I got to high school, like the first lesson in like grade 7. Oh, so we've just got primary and high school, 13 years, kindergarten 1 through 6, and then 7 through 12 is high school. And the maths teacher they sort of started by saying, you're going to find out that there were like that a lot of what you know is like wrong in some way. Like in essence, that the stuff you've learned about maths is like partially lying to make it easier at that stage, and things are a lot deeper or whatever than before. And so I come back to that thought, thinking about this sort of stuff, because it's the most like it's the easiest thing for me to think about, I guess, in this context, in the idea that of like partial explanations, or giving someone something that isn't really true or has big problems with it, but that's good enough, for like an incremental approach, which is different from a lot of the ways where we learn stuff that's good enough, where it's not intended to be followed up on, or it's intended to just let someone make one choice, particularly, like someone advising a CEO or something like that comes to mind. Um, yeah, I don't like it feels like this sort of topic though is much harder than thinking about adults doing this sort of stuff. Like it's easier to think about adults than it is kids, um, with this sort of learning, whether it's good or not to have partial stuff, or what lies are okay and things like that. Lies is maybe a strong word, but like incomplete or incorrect explanations.
The focusing on one choice thing you mentioned, I think, is notable. I think a lot of the errors are because the person has an agenda. They're trying to teach you a particular conclusion or get you to agree to a particular point. And so they pick an analogy that, in their analogy, that point is clearer or easier to accept or something.
Mm.
And they have little regard for, is the analogy true in general? Is it a good way to understand the actual principles involved or anything like that? It's just, think of it this way, and then you will reach the conclusion I want you to.
Yeah, which I think is actually an odd, like it points out an odd sort of thing in the relationship between like advisor and CEO or similar stuff, in that the much better thing to do is like for the CEO to say, what do you think we should do and why, and have the person sort of explain that, as opposed to, tell me about this blockchain thing. And it's like, well, it's like this, and it's like, it doesn't seem like we should invest any resources into that idea or that project or whatever else, or maybe that we should because of the way that it's been explained. And so, in order to actually understand whether the analogy is good or not, or how it relates to the choice, you need to understand a bigger picture. Otherwise, like as the CEO or someone, you're still gonna like you're gonna be prone to mistakes in that, uh, like in your judgment, particularly because the analogy is theory laden. Um, Yeah, so I completely agree. It's like it's problematic.
Yeah, an example that's very, very blatantly biased is think of blockchain like a pot of gold. If you want a pot of gold,
Mm.
you should invest in blockchain. Like it's completely about the conclusion, not about explaining anything.
Yes, yeah, that's a good example.
Also about math stuff. It's possible to teach it so that the stuff you learn early on is not wrong later. Like it's better that way. It's better to learn principles that actually are correct. And the sort of shortcuts they use in school that they then have to correct later make things more confusing. They're adding all these sort of parochial details. They try to simplify, but in some ways they make it more complicated because you have to learn everything as a special case.
Mm. Yeah, like it's this is something that, yeah, I guess I don't know the answer. I don't have a reason to think that it's not possible, but I should probably say the thing. Uh like incrementally teaching something, whether it's possible to always incrementally teach in such a way that you like you don't have to make those sort of compromises. Um I think it's probably just a matter that people are really bad at doing that sort of stuff, and so they don't know how to. And so the logical sort of outcome is that they end up making those compromises because, like, for a primary school teacher, getting your kids to learn maths enough to pass the test that, you know, judges whether you're a good teacher or not is more important than setting them up to be like good mathematicians later in life.
I think it's partly subject specific and how bad people are at understanding the subject. I think with history, for example, they compromise less. They give you like less false info as an approximation than they do with math. And I think that's because the math teachers like don't understand their material very well. I think a lot of history teachers, like I wouldn't call them particularly good at it, but they're not as confused about what they're teaching you as the math teachers are.
Well, a lot of time as well with history, it's like there are ways to like teach quote unquote something such that like you could essentially be like reading facts sort of thing. You can't necessarily answer deeper questions about like what was going on in the minds of Romans leading up to the uh, murder of Caesar or things, but you can, you know, make sure that kids know that Caesar was murdered, um, that sort of thing. Whereas with maths, it's like if you listed facts, then you sort of just get nonsense. Like there's maths requires explanations in order to or in order to like be able to use that knowledge a lot more. Whereas I think history has a bigger uh, sort of reliance on like our shared experiences sort of thing or experiences that are common.
Yeah,
Um,
so with math, if you gave someone a bunch of mathematical facts, like here are the answers to different math problems, they would have a hard time figuring out what do the operators do, what are the principles here. You can't just hand them the facts and let them analyze it themselves. However, with history, you can give them a lot of facts and let them think about it themselves because they have the background knowledge to understand things like that guy was angry at that other guy, or he wanted revenge, or he wanted wealth and glory, or like they have other ways of knowing about a lot of the relevant explanations because it involves like human action and social interactions and emotions and political leadership and
mm,
governments and wars, and you learn about those in a lot of different ways and understand what's going on there. So then, if you get historical facts about a particular era and set of events, you're in a decent position from just standard cultural knowledge to come up with some explanations about what's going on. And they
yep,
do tend to give really at least basic explanations in history classes.
yeah,
They don't give you random facts. The facts fit patterns in quite reasonable ways. Like you get a bunch of facts related to Rome, often in chronological order.
yeah, yeah. It's occurs to me like the one of the reasons that it's easier for people to like distill the relevant facts. Um, like it would be possible to get a whole bunch of maths facts that are much more useful than other math facts, both in order and topic. But with something like history, um, we have a reasonable way to, or people are generally a lot better at figuring that out because it's the same skill as like understanding like what's going on in a novel and understanding, you know, what happened between your friends or stuff like that. It's like a skill that we use all over the place.
So your conclusion's kind of negative. I think it's a partial solution. It helps sometimes. Sometimes it is useful for improving conversations. Often it's
Yeah.
tried before the impasse. Like usually before an impasse is first declared, this has already been tried because it's a standard method.
Yep.
Usually people either
Um,
did it or refused to do it, and then you have an impasse.
I agree. It's when I realized I was a bit vague there. When I mean, like, when I say reframing the idea isn't a good solution, I guess what I mean is like it's not a general solution to what happens with disagreements. You can't reframe your way out of every disagreement.
Yeah.
It's a useful technique, and it's better than pulling out impasses as a solution to stuff. Because if it was just a miscommunication, then it's easier to solve and it's more productive and so on. But it's often you can tell somewhat when it's going to be a good solution. Um, there's a decent intuition about miscommunications, but not about other stuff.
I don't think exclusions work on other topics either. There's often cross-disciplinary relevance. This is one of the reasons fields go wrong is that they don't want to think about other fields and the relevance. Like Sens doesn't want to learn economics.
Hmm.
Or a lot of scientists don't want to learn enough about philosophy of science. And then they do explanationless correlation studies. And the
I so I
criticisms of that are outside of what they think their field is.
Yeah, I agree with that, and in part, that's like I could say that that's due to like philosophy being a part of like good thinking, which is at the end of the day sort of part of it. Or doing anything effectively. Um, I think what I meant is like if you've got a discussion about like the structural integrity of bridges, then it's unlikely that something like orbital mechanics will need to come into it. So there's more of a burden for someone in that conversation to like argue that this is relevant. Um, it's like you've got to do uh, like some work to get around the default of orbital mechanics not being relevant to bridges. Um, I guess is what I was trying to say a bit. Oh, that's still my yeah. Like I still think that's true, but I'm a bit vague on it at the moment, so maybe not.
There's so most things are not relevant, but quite a few are. If someone only cares about like the structure of the bridge itself, they're going to get into trouble because other things are relevant, like how much weight is going on the bridge, how often, what the weather conditions are, whether tsunamis are hitting it, whether meteors are hitting it. Like there's a bunch of environmental factors that also affect the bridge. It's not only the internal factors. So any
Yeah,
kind of narrow topic limits can often run into fairly mundane problems. Theory of constraints is another example where a lot of business people are like, well, I just make printers. And then they don't want to deal with this theoretical stuff about how to run a business, but it's super relevant.
yeah,
And it's not just theory of constraints, like any sort of business management or leadership stuff would be relevant if it was even a different school of thought.
yeah.
Okay, so impasse chain. Carrie, Gavin, Max. We have impasse number 1.
So this is just some commentary on Gavin's other stuff. Not sure if it's super relevant.
This is a weird request. Like, what's wrong with an image? It's unclear why he wants a different format.
Yeah. Well,
And also,
it's
and why he thinks
it's
the answer might not just be no.
well, one of the things he's not yeah, because the question is really like, will you do something or not, as opposed to like, how do I do this? One thing that sort of gets me is that like images have been used in the past in that thread. Like I don't know why he would really want to do it without an image, or he's put an image up before. And it's
Yeah,
like,
it seemed oddly lazy.
why is an image necessary? Or why is the lack of an image necessary? It's sort of, yeah, it is odd. There's a few things that if you read, like reading that thread closer, seem odd. I think even the wording would still be better with, I don't know what you mean. Can you give me an example? Is better wording than, can you do this in an odd way? One thing I don't like about MindNode is that I can't like have all the trees take up space according to columns of what fits in what, as opposed to being able to be more compact.
Yeah, I know what you mean. My node has manual spacing. Yours might have it as well, somewhere.
There's a freeform mode where I can drag them to wherever I want.
Yeah.
But then they start going off in different directions and stuff like that. Like if
Yes,
it was
it's not
freeform but
necessarily
default,
worth the hassle.
yeah, it's much easier. Like if I reorganize the tree, like drag stuff around, then that could cause, like I've had problems before with that sort of thing. So that's why I don't do it. Um, yeah.
What do these little squares mean?
Oh, those were the checkboxes I mentioned. They're just to highlight where the options are. Um, I tried to bold it, which comes out in mine, but apparently hasn't come out in the PDF or something.
I see.
Yeah. So I realize in the first sentence there I say Curie only has an onus to participate if he wants to, which is a weird thing to say. Like you only have to do something if you want to do it is not really an onus, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's a fancy word that's not needed.
Mm.
And also, I think that's not the main point. Like, it's true that I'm not responsible for dealing with it, but the main point is I literally explained it to him. That was how I opened, was
Mm.
explaining what was going on, and then he didn't engage with me. So it's not like I was not providing info. I put effort into explaining my position. I already did that, and then he ignored everything I said.
Yeah. I'm just wondering about the use of the word responsibility. Does so in that case where like Gavin claims Curie shares some responsibility in the impasse. I mean, he's using responsibility as a synonym for blame there. Is that actually like a valid definition, or like is that a valid use of the word?
I think the word responsibility is okay.
Oh yeah, so second noun definition, the state or fact of being accountable or to blame for something. So yeah, so that's fine. I've
Yeah,
just
the
read
in is bad.
weird
It
just
should
then.
be for instead of in.
Yeah, yep.
I find it strange when people like don't know prepositions. Like, I understand it for ESL people, but I don't think Gavin is ESL.
Um, well, one weird thing about prepositions, like we had where was it, the from, to, of, I think, when with some relational stuff, that were
Yeah,
turned out to be like a difference in British and American English.
yeah, there are a few country differences, but I doubt that this is one of them. And Gavin is American, I'm pretty sure.
I think he is too, yeah. Oh, he's got his state or something in his title, like his time zone, which is American.
I
In
don't know
his
if it means
Discord
that they
name,
just don't
maybe.
read books, and that's why they didn't develop a intuition for like
I mean, I
standard
didn't read
phrasings.
a whole bunch of books, but I've got a pretty strong intuition about that sort of stuff. Like, I feel
Is
like
this
I
one clear to
more.
you? Like that the in should be
Um,
for?
I think the difference might be in terms of whether it was like what you're referring to. So um, some responsibility for the events that took. Oh, maybe not. I'm trying to come up with examples. Like for the events that took place, or for the effect. Um, like maybe like responsibility in the outcome. No, for the outcome. No, I don't know when in is right there.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's just wrong.
like yeah, my initial idea was that like blame for an effect versus blame in some undertaking sort of thing, like whether it's like a noun or a verb is the root of the what's behind the preposition, what's after the preposition. But no, I think it's just for.
Did you have any sympathy overall with Gavin's side of the conversation?
Maybe a little bit to start with. I mean, afterwards though, after you link the essay and he just doesn't read it, um, like in terms of sympathy, I would say basically like his first reply there, um, where he's like, you could try and explain this, or can you do this, or whatever else. There's a little bit of sympathy in the sense that he's not familiar with the idea of impasse chains or stuff at that point. But after that, I think it's, I mean, I actually like point out down here, like his second reply that is just a verbatim copy of the one above it. Or like, I think this is, yeah, the reply to impasse 3. Like, I think that it's actually bad faith by his own standards, which, so
Oh, I don't
definitely
think
not at that
so.
point. Oh, okay. All
I
right.
disagree about that one. I think I know why he did that. He seemed to think that the problem was that he was responding to the wrong thing because I kept commenting like you didn't respond to X. So he changed the tag on it. He thought I was being pedantic about which message he tagged and that he had assigned the wrong parent to his text.
One thing I do have some sympathy for is that it's sort of difficult for people, I think, to sort of grok the idea that being explicit in your questions and actions and stuff is important and like a good thing to do. In that, like often in social situations we're punished for that, but uh, like here, a thing that he could have done is when he posted this, like said, I've done this because I like it seemed like you were just being pedantic about what I was replying to. Um, like something like that would have provided more info and might not have continued the impasse chain because at that point he's commenting like in a way that actually relates it to the impasse. Um, Now, granted, it doesn't really, it's not particularly favorable still because in this case because the impasse is like you didn't engage with impasse 1, and what he links to is further up in the conversation than impasse 1. Um, I think, or is it? Oh no, no, sorry. It is actually linking to. It is replying to impasse 1, 16695. But
Yeah, but he was
uh,
trying to respond to impasse 1 in response to impasses 2 and 3.
Yes, yeah,
So
he
2
still
and
hasn't
3
like
were
read
not
the essay
getting
or
responses.
yeah. So I don't have any sympathy with Gavin here, but I have sympathy in general with people not like realize or having trouble adjusting to the idea of being explicit in why they're doing stuff or their goals or uh their understanding or stuff like that. Um, that I think takes a bit of work to sort of make automatic.
What do you think most people would think of the conversation, like standard conventional view?
Um, that you're being a bit of an asshole by forcing this issue about impasses. Um, that would be, I imagine, most people's initial judgment. They probably wouldn't think particularly highly of Gavin in the conversation either. But I think there's a reasonable expectation. Sorry, not that the expectation is reasonable, but that people have the expectation that it is reasonable to uh, like do more work to either like understand the other person or to continue things even in like suboptimal circumstances or stuff like that. I think Gavin actually sort of expresses this a bit um, with some of the stuff he says about like I've done. Oh well, yeah, with this, like I'm asking you this, I've shown this, I'm sincere, blah, whatever. Like that in normal social context is seen as somewhat reasonable.
The issue wasn't his sincerity, like he's not actually responding to the things I said were the impasse.
Mm. Um, oh, I agree. And I think that like the fact that people see sincerity as a bit of an excuse is bad because like sincerity doesn't mean anything about like quality or like intent or effect or outcome or productivity or things like that. Like you can be sincere and entirely ineffective. Um, it's not a reason, it's not an excuse, but I think there's like an expectation that it should be, sort of that goes along with like attitudes like um, uh, always give people the benefit of the doubt in every circumstance and do so indefinitely and stuff like that.
Part of the issue is people are really bad at taking things literally. Like they try to read all your statements as being hints about what they should do instead of just looking at what it actually says.
Yes, I agree. Um, it's a hard mindset to try and creep out of because it's so prevalent, like in everything that we're taught.
Yeah, sometimes people agree with my stuff like pause forward or impasse change or whatever when they read about it. But then if it's applied to them, they suddenly don't like it and can't deal with it well.
Yeah,
And I'm
I think
wondering
that's
how you would handle like similar questions and stuff if you were faced with it.
um, it's hard to predict now. Like I mean, I haven't had this sort of thing come up in the last few months, as far as I know, at least not to this extent. Um, so I mean, my communication style has changed quite a bit since the middle of the year. Um, yeah, so I'm not sure now. Previously, though, I would have gotten frustrated. Um, I've thought a lot about the idea of like why people get annoyed at stuff and basing, stuff like what we base our identity on and why people are offended by certain things and other people in the same group maybe aren't and stuff like that. Um, I think it's like people have a lot of trouble dealing with this stuff because it's critical of things that they believe true about themselves that make it really difficult to like acknowledge a problem without conflict. And so because they haven't done enough work to like get themselves in order and figure out their attitude about criticism in the world and their place in it and stuff, it means that this stuff is anything of this sort of nature is of a similar magnitude in terms of it's almost like catastrophic for their ego, which I think is a big problem with how one lives their life. And we should do our best not to have those sort of um, those sort of reactions or defaults and stuff like that.
Here I say the reply to impasse 2 didn't engage with impasse 2. So then he repeats the same reply, but no longer marks impasse 2 as the parent, because in fact it did not engage with impasse 2. He changes the parent to impasse 1, which is the thing that it was attempting to engage with. So this like makes sense in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So as I was writing out, because that was where I put most of the options type stuff. Um, uh, I think it's like it's one of those things where it would actually maybe be the start to a solution to impasse 1 if he resolved impasses 3 and 2. And then so my comments on the right hand side are uh, like how my thoughts on this sort of thing, in that there's a uh, like a progression from left to right for those three options.
Yeah,
Um,
the problem with this, besides ignoring impasses 3 and 2, is it's also a bad answer to impasse 1. Like it's topical, like it has to do with it, but it doesn't actually address it.
hmm.
He's not dealing with the problems that I listed.
I think it's actually directly contradicting what do you call it? The first point you brought up about things being like disorganized, in that that's like it's a one long sentence. It's not easy to parse and understand and what relates to what and stuff like that. Um,
Yes, yeah, it definitely has a writing quality type problem.
so I'm curious what you think of my proposed like alternatives there, though.
But like the biggest problem with it is he isn't thinking, what is Curie's point of view? What is a way to continue that makes sense not only from my point of view, but also from Curie's point of view? He's not actually trying to solve that problem or offer that. This is an
Yeah,
issue I've had with people a lot. And one of the things I've noticed, besides them like not even understanding it, is they think it's very demanding, like I'm saying everything has to fit my way or make sense according to my views or whatever. But and they don't understand that that's implied by mutual benefit. Mutual benefit means we both make all the demands we need to get benefit, and they all have to be met for both of us.
yeah. If there's no intersection point, then we shouldn't have a discussion. Um,
They're
I
really,
think that's
really used to compromise.
in part because like they don't have explicit demands of what they want for a conversation. It's not even demands at that point. It's just like, a policy. Um, yours feel like a demand because you have explicit policies, uh, and thus they can be demands. Whereas it's hard to argue that something is a demand without a policy, without anything explicit there.
Yeah, yeah, that makes stuff harder. Like they want politeness, but they won't say that or define it, etc.
Yep. Sometimes they do. Like I've seen like, websites where they'll have like rules about stuff, and politeness will be one of them. But it's sort of funny in that people will look at that and think, "Oh, that's a good idea," and then apply it everywhere, even though where they saw it, it was explicitly listed and it's not listed in other places. Um, it's sort of, I mean, I guess it's, yeah, people being vague on this stuff in general and not, they've got one model for having a discussion and they just keep like updating or changing that one, as opposed to, yeah, different models for different situations and stuff.
Yeah, the lack of flexibility and being able to think in different frameworks is a big problem. It's very similar to people generally sort of have one philosophy rather than being familiar with different ones and thinking they have strengths and weaknesses and that different ones can be used at different times and combinations can be used and so on. People are usually just an objectivist or a Popperian or a Bayesian. Like they just pick one that they like.
That strikes me as sort of weird and counterintuitive, in that like mutual compatibility was a really big thing for me in when I was like learning stuff earlier on, like reading BOI and it being like compatible with other stuff that I was thinking about. Um, yeah, because do people just not consider compatibility? I mean, if you only had one, there's no reason to consider it, right? But
Yeah, there's a
It's
mix of things. People seem to sort of want one answer. It's a little like religions, people just pick one. The idea of studying multiple religions is pretty uncommon.
hmm.
And I think people have enough trouble learning something that they don't want to learn like two different things. Like they're bad enough at their one that they focus on.
Hmm.
They don't think everything's incompatible. Like sometimes they're not hostile to all the other things, they just don't actually pay much attention to them.
One thing I thought as well, just before I forget, was you were talking about like people thinking, okay, what does Curie mean by this or stuff. Um, I think that's part of the like it's related to the reading into things problem, in that people don't generally understand the difference between like reading into things to find hints and looking at something and trying to think what was the explanation behind this thing. In part because when you're doing the hint thing, it is about the explanation as well. You've got to like read in to say, all right, what are they trying to actually say without saying, as opposed to just going half the way and it's like, why did they say this? Um, and yeah, one half is good, the other half isn't. Uh, that's a I think that's a bit of a difficult thing to try and separate because people don't generally practice only half of it. Um,
So
maybe in some circumstances they do.
you're talking about text analysis basically, right?
Yeah. Um,
Figuring out what words mean. Um, there are some issues and some relevance there, but that's not what I had in mind when I was speaking earlier. What I had in mind was like a bigger picture perspective, like goals and what things I think are useful or not useful. Like, I think your statements are repeatedly unclear. This discussion is not worth it for me if you're going to be that hard to understand. Um, if they would acknowledge that I have that point of view, then they need a way to continue that has mutual benefit, which means makes sense from my point of view, which means does not involve me reading more statements I think are unclear and responding to them as the next step. Like something different that I don't think is bad has to happen next.
mm, there's so there's a thought that's a bit unclear at the moment. It's about like when you were saying that in the example you gave, like I think this is unclear or whatever else. There's no trouble in figuring out the explanation for why you said that, in that it's just perfectly obvious as such. Um, the the trouble is sort of in the other direction to reading into things, with regards to hints and stuff. It's more like trying to see a bigger, like you use the word bigger picture, but like what is this statement compatible with, that's bigger with it, as opposed to like what are the components of this statement, um, the hidden stuff behind it. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I've got this feeling of
I think a lot of
subsets and
it
supersets and stuff.
I think a lot of it is that they disagree. Like they're like, my statements were clear and wonderful. I'm like, okay, so you think your statements were clear and wonderful. I think they were unclear, confusing, and dumb. We need a way that makes sense to continue from both of our perspectives. Like, given my perspective, it needs to make sense. So the fact that you disagree with me isn't going to make it make sense from my perspective. But they'll try to debate me and say it was really clear because, and I'm like, but now you're just saying more statements of the type I object to without doing anything to try to address the problem. Like, because debating me and telling me I'm wrong doesn't try to solve the problem I'm having.
Mm,
It's very similar when I think they're incompetent and they will debate with me and say how smart they are and knowledgeable and whatever. And that is not effective and it doesn't solve the problem that I don't want to debate them using the same discussion methodology that hasn't been working while they're being incompetent. So if they make incompetent debating comments in favor of their competence, from my perspective, like that's I don't want to engage with that any more than the original. They need to think, like, given Gary thinks that I'm incompetent, what could we do to continue? That would seem reasonable from his perspective, rather
one
than
thing.
trying to convince me to stop thinking they're incompetent.
Yeah, one thing that occurs to me, I'm not sure if people have this experience in general. Maybe it's just mum being a lawyer, so we talked about this stuff. But a common, as far as I can tell, a common way when someone wants to be like particularly clear, uh, they like one of the common techniques is to use dot points. It's to like break stuff down into, you know, so simple sentences, dot points is one of the ways to do it. And it occurs to me that like debating you on whether they're clear or not is if they don't change their methodology for doing that, it's regardless of whether you're right about them being clear or not, it's not going to ever solve the problem because they're not changing the thing that uh, that makes it clear. And even if they wanted to, like, they could debate you about that and also change their methodology, which would at least, you know, open a door to progress.
So, like, if I think they're incompetent, and then they have a way of continuing that will work well if they are competent, but will work badly if they're incompetent, then on my premises, it's not a good way to continue. It's not going to work. But people seem incapable of understanding that, which strikes me as incompetent, ironically.
Mm.
People seem unwilling to be
Mm.
able to, like, take the idea, Curie thinks I'm incompetent, or, hypothetically I'm incompetent, and then given that, what ways forward are there? Like, they
This
can't treat that idea as an external object to be considered and, um, I don't know, treated like a normal idea and just be objective about it instead of just, like, fighting it.
this sort of relationship, like using a methodology that will work only if the point of contention isn't the case, like a method to discuss their incompetence that only works if they're competent. Um, the This feels quite similar to the relationship. Like one of the things that I particularly liked about fallibilism, learning about it the first time, was that I felt like it was compatible with itself. Like even if it was wrong, it was correct enough that you could argue that it was wrong under its own rules, sort of thing. Um, so that it's got the opposite sort of thing here. Like if fallibilism was wrong, you could still, under the rules of fallibilism, like get like to that understanding, which is the inverse of like the incompetence thing, where you can only ever like win that debate about being competent if you are competent, and if you're incompetent, then there's no way through that process that you'd ever actually realize it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they need to come up with a way forward that will make sense if they're competent or incompetent, either one.
Yeah.
Not one that relies on one or the other answer and just totally fails in the opposite case.
Yeah. So something like dot points and going slowly would be, I feel like, a good way to at least start that process. That could potentially lead to a good outcome. Um,
What do you mean by
which
dot point?
Oh, as in so trying to break stuff down into as small chunks as possible, and listing them as opposed to necessarily writing full sentences. It means stuff like
Bullet
taking
point
out.
list.
Yeah. That's what I mean by dot points. Yeah, bullet points.
Okay. Okay, so option. Clearly, the first time Gavin posted this message, it didn't have the desired effect. Instead, Gavin could have said something like,
Oh,
instead
instead
of
of posting it a second time.
yeah, that's what I was guessing. Alright, one. I'm not sure how to resolve this, but I don't want it to get worse. How should we proceed so we can resolve these impasses? Yeah, that's not great, but it's like okay. It's like trying in some way. Oh, you say that. Not great.
Yeah, that was like the first thing that sort of came to mind. I think it was the thing that I mentioned a little bit at the end of last session. Um,
Yeah, this would not immediately lead to another impasse chain. Although it would be dishonest, I think, to say this, given that he hadn't read the article. Like, I'm not sure how we resolve this, but not mentioning that he skipped the link that had ideas about how to resolve it is
It's
kind of unfair, and asking me to like repeat the stuff I already wrote down, kind of.
yeah, I would in other situations I might give someone a bit more leeway for something like that if it was hard to like if there was a chance that they missed the link. But as it happens, your post is like 15 words long, and the link is two of them. It's pretty hard to miss.
This one is weird. Like, if he said, I will respond directly to impasses, I'd be like, okay, go ahead. Like, respond, do it. I'm waiting. Like, it'd be weird to say this and then not do it. Um, and like require further prompting.
Yeah. So the reason I wrote this down was that I mean I expand on it in the next one, but particularly because like impasse 3 is the reply to impasse 2 didn't engage with impasse 2. So this has to like directly reply to impasse 3, but they're sort of trivial impasses in that there's no solution besides just engaging with it, sort of thing. Like, because this impasse is that you're not engaging to impasses. So simply the engagement with impasses sort of resolves it. Yeah, so it's a weird thing to say on its own. I don't think like someone should. I think they should sort of try and predict what will happen after that and sort of preempt or proactively like address other stuff. But I'm not sure how else. How would like besides essentially saying I'm going to respond to impasses, does one resolve impasse 3?
So he should give a statement in his words of what impasse 3 is. Like, what is the problem, what's going on, and then what is his solution. Like, part of what's going on is like, why did it happen? Saying, I will now respond to impasses. Well, why didn't you before? What was the problem? What was causing you not to? Um,
Yeah.
he's not explaining that anything got solved here.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I would imagine like casual conversation that it would like I will respond directly to impasses sort of comes out as like okay, all right, I understand I haven't been responding to impasses and that we need to resolve them in reverse order. So I'm going to agree to resolve them like now type thing. Um, that would be how I imagine someone would sort of put it. Which I think is at least partially along the lines that you just mentioned. It's not great. It's not great. It's not like reiterating. All right, I understand the ideas behind impasse chains now and why it's really important, and I agree that I haven't been doing a good job in this conversation. So I'm gonna reread this again after this, but I'm gonna try and do blah now. Like that would probably be a better thing.
Yeah, so I'd want to know like why he changed his mind. Um, and I'd want him to say some things that convince me that he actually understands it now, and that
Yeah.
he's capable of doing this, and that he understands like what is and isn't a response, and things he seemed to not have a grasp on. Like, my suspicion would be that he'd need like some new skills and practice and learning in order to be able to do this. Like, I don't think he knows how. And if he just said he's going to do it when I don't think he knows how, that's not going to be very convincing, in addition to not
My
explaining why he wasn't before.
my intuition is that like on a technical level, it should resolve impasse 3, but it doesn't like bode well for the future of the conversation. Like we don't have any reason to believe that we're just not going to get back there in the next like reply or whatever. Um,
I don't regard it as like a proper technical answer because it doesn't say what was the problem that caused this and then what's the solution to it.
yeah, okay.
And it doesn't say what was the reason for this. It is very similar to what was the cause. So if you don't analyze what went wrong and then how to deal with it, that seems incomplete.
Yeah, okay. No, I can see that.
When I read this, what I hear is sort of like, I'll obey you. I'll try to do what you're saying, even though I think it's bad. Like, he thought it was bad, which was implied by him refusing to do it. And then I was more demanding, and he's like, oh, if you're going to be that demanding, I guess I'll listen. And that's not rational. That's not understanding what the problem was or why my way is good. If he thinks my way is bad, I don't want him to cargo cult it. That's not going to lead to a good discussion. So that's part of why it's important that he shows some understanding and like change his mind in some way. If he hasn't changed his mind and he's still the same person who was ignoring me before, then there's a major unsolved problem still present.
So is that like, given that there's obviously like my intuition about what resolves impasses and stuff is obviously a bit off. Does that like maybe indicate that like should you have explained more about that sort of stuff somewhere? Like either briefly in these comments or because I don't think from memory there's nothing in your is there? Oh, now I need to go check. In
I
the
don't know. But if someone said this,
yeah,
it would be enough to get the ball rolling. Like I could
yeah,
say in response, okay, what's your response to 3? And then if they said, well, I thought I just responded, is this not good enough? What else do I need to do? Then I could
yeah,
tell them. It's hard to preemptively answer everything, um, especially with a lack of feedback on articles in general.
yes, yeah,
But even when I do get feedback, it's often like everyone has a different question. Rather, sometimes a bunch of people ask the same question, which is a good sign that you should answer that question preemptively. But a lot of times it's not like that at all. Like no
yeah.
one's ever brought up your particular question that I recall.
The inconsistency I think is actually evidence you shouldn't answer those questions preemptively because if nothing else, they apparently weren't that relevant to the audience, the other audience members who ask questions.
It's hard to tell because people don't ask most of the questions that are relevant to them. They don't think of
Mm.
them, or they're passive, or lots of things happen. But sometimes people see someone else's question and then they're like, "Oh, that's a good question. I should have asked that. That one will be helpful to me." That definitely does happen sometimes.
It is. I feel like it's a bit hard to gauge in the sense that someone's lack of understanding on a topic, like if they're asking questions and they don't understand something about it, then there's a whole host of questions that are like children of that question that they would ask depending on like the answer to that if it was clearer to them. Um, and they might agree, like they might realize that and that they should ask them when someone else points them out. But there's a sort of intuitive gap to get over that they sort of can't think that far ahead.
Yeah, I explained more here because I thought it was less self-explanatory, or not quite self-explanatory, but like the previous ones were really straightforward. Like he just literally did not engage at all. This one was a non-response while trying to do something else.
Mm.
So I thought it merited like a bit more explanation.
There's there's another option that I had in that list, by the way, that's off the right-hand side of the screen. That's
Yeah,
longer.
I
I don't know if
read
we.
that one as like an elaboration of this one.
Yeah, okay. If we don't need to talk, that's fine as well. Um, that I thought that the third one though would be the best way for him to respond.
Yeah, the
And I
extra text helps figure out what's going on, where his perspective's at. I agree that one
I
would
was
be better.
one thing as well. I was also trying to be concise in writing these because otherwise you just get a big block of text in a tree diagram and it takes longer and whatever. Um, so that's part of the reason that like the middle one was crap. But yeah, I don't think you really needed to point out like the thing in more detail there. By the way, um, like having read the essay. I don't think it's like a particularly big leap. I think it's not bad to do so. It's good, but
Yeah, it
there's
was only
no
one
requirement
sentence.
to. Yeah.
This is such a typical bad response. Like, I put forth effort. I accused him of not putting forth effort in a particular respect, like about a specific thing. It was a narrow statement, and now he's making a broad statement that sort of overall, somewhere in the conversation, he put in effort, which is compatible with my complaint being true.
Mm. This relates to so in the first Gavin message in this chain, where he says like you have to be willing to learn if you want to have a conversation thing. Um, uh, like yeah, I think it relates because his of the claim of effort and that how that relates to like sincerity. Um, but like I particularly point out that they're like often people are like a little bit, but they don't want to do indirection to get there. They're sort of like it's sort of honest, but it's not really. Or it's sort of like accurate in some ways, but not really.
Yeah, I note that you don't have his follow-up. I forget if it was on the blog post or it might have been on Discord. But from memory, he said basically he didn't read the article until after impasse number 5. And if only he had one more chance, he would totally solve everything now. However, he then, did not respond to impasse 5 with a bunch of solutions because, he decided I'd already given up, so it was too late, so rip. But, like, which makes no sense whatsoever. If he could really solve everything, be like, now I understand everything that happened, like, here's my answer to 5, here's my answer to 4, here's my answer to... Like, if he could do that, I'm not just gonna ghost him and be like, conversation was over, bye. But he
I'm not
didn't.
sure. Was that in this thing or somewhere else?
Well, I said I wasn't sure if it was here or in Discord.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yep, sorry. I didn't catch that. Um, that's probably why I don't have the response there. I sort of like
Yeah, it
looked
was
at the.
probably
There's not
Discord
much.
then.
That makes sense.
I thought it was pretty wishful thinking. Like, I don't think that me cutting it off at 5 instead of 6 was why we got the outcome we got. I think I could have changed it to 10 and gotten the same outcome.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was more like um, the more important thing was not the fifth impasse or whatever else. It wasn't that he needed that. It's that now you were at a limit, and that made him reconsider things a bit as opposed to the times beforehand. And in
Yeah,
that sense, increasing the limit to 10 would only be worse for you.
there's something screwy about it because, like, impasse number 1 was I already hit my limit. I don't want to have this conversation with you anymore. Here's why I think it's broken and I don't want to continue it. Like, it was already you should go into
It's
critical damage repair mode if you care.
it's conversational life support, yeah. Maybe a better name for it because impasse sounds a bit like the word doesn't feel very impactful, I guess, or maybe
Really?
uh so not necessarily by definition, but the way people like so uh you could say like there's an obstacle on the bridge or like the entire bridge is collapsed sort of thing. That would be like I guess maybe
Here's
it's I just have a
here's
bad
the dictionary I
intuition for the
use
word.
most often. A situation in which no progress is possible, especially because of disagreement, a deadlock. It's a very strong word.
Yeah, okay. Um, yeah, no, fair.
It's
I think I
possible
just
people
didn't
don't
have
know
good
that.
intuition.
That is completely plausible to me.
Well, I
That
would
maybe a lot of people are wrong, but
yeah, I think that actually might be the case. Like my intuition was, um, like you might be able to find a workaround or stuff for an impasse. Um, I think particularly because it's very similar to like a hypothetical compound word of like not pass or like unpass or something like that, which people could be very loose about. Uh, like in the same way that like obstacle doesn't mean that there's no way around it. It just means that there's like a hurdle to get over. Um, yeah,
yeah, but he didn't. I mean, he didn't even treat it like a serious obstacle or hurdle, in that I expressed certain objections to continue the conversation, and he did not actually try to address them. Like, in my original impasse, he didn't try to solve those problems. Even if he just took it as problems, he didn't apparently care about my problems, which
Y-
is related to not looking for mutual benefit. Like, it has to make sense from both people's point of view. People don't have a grasp of that.
Yeah. One thing that I'm wondering whether this would, I mean, it's sort of, I don't think it's necessary, but like one thing I might try if I use this with like discussions with people more generally about democracy stuff with Flux is uh, like say that there's an impasse, but then also have like another sentence directly after it, which is like this conversation is now on life support, like something that is very difficult for people to misinterpret. Um, and I wonder if that would maybe make people
I
take it
think
more
life
seriously.
support is easy to misinterpret for what it's worth. It's a metaphor. Life support sounds like a positive thing, like something is helping it live. One actually has to stop and think to figure out what it means, or have strong
Oh,
intuitions pre-existing.
oh, okay. I wonder, like, because I particularly get the life support, like what you just described, from a like a BOI type perspective, but not from like an intuitive perspective. But I wonder if that would maybe actually just be inconsistent with everyone. Like there wouldn't be a like a society wide thing to
I think it's
generalize
a
on.
fairly standard phrase, but people don't actually think about what it means, and they're not very good at dealing with phrases that they haven't thought through.
Yeah, so it
And it,
need like a better thing might be like this is metaphorically CPR for this conversation would be like uh, a more accurate way to describe that analogy or less misinterpretable.
I'm that's very similar issues. Like, I think it would be clearer to say something like, I don't want to have the conversation anymore unless this impasse is solved. This is a deal breaker for me.
Yep, deal breaker is actually a good word. Um, it's stronger than impasse. You still there, by the way? Internet's not playing up.
Yeah? Can you hear
Oh,
me?
okay, cool. Sorry, YouTube just screwed up. Like it dropped low res and got the loading icon, so I wasn't sure if there was a dropout or something.
Oh, okay.
All good. Cool. All right, I'm
The
just gonna
problem was not primarily about his effort. Like, that was a bit of an aside, not a main point.
yeah. Um, yeah. No, I think he's sort of missing the
Like,
point again there.
disorganized, unproductive, the conversation is not productive. You can't, putting in more
Effort
effort
your
is
way out of
not
it.
going to necessarily fix that. You need methods that work.
Um, yeah, disorganized, chaotic, ineffective, and unproductive are the four adjectives you used.
Right. So,
None of
more
which is effort
effort while
related.
being ineffective will not solve your problem.
In many ways, it actually makes it worse. Um, I'm just gonna take a quick bathroom break. Back in a tick. Okay.
Okay, so any final questions about the Gavin impasse stuff?
No, I think on that I'm sort of pretty satisfied. I did have a related uh bit of thought, which was I am not sure if you've posted anything about like how to resolve an impasse or how to respond to impasses. And I think that might be useful for people. Um,
It's
it's also something that I
problem
could write. Like,
solving, basically. Like I've written lots of things related to problem solving,
hmm,
um, and learning and knowledge creation and so on. So it's you just there's no special method really.
yeah, it's I guess the reason I sort of think this is that it's probably an unfamiliar situation for people. Um, and so if they don't have good ways of dealing with it or knowing about it or things, they yeah, are probably going to respond inappropriately, at least at first. But I think we sort of on a related topic, I think we talked a bit last week about it, or earlier this week, whether anyone's like ever. So I'm sort of curious, has anyone ever like actually like explicitly resolved an impasse, like just one, as opposed to a chain?
So people pretty much haven't had conversations with me since I wrote that article.
Yeah, okay,
There haven't been a lot of opportunities.
fair enough.
And there's like problems have been resolved, like misunderstandings have been cleared up. That happens, reasonably often. But like I don't usually go in for explicitly saying here's our impasse unless there's a major problem, not a minor one. And so by the time it's like escalated to that point, it's usually not going to get resolved. Like I
Mhm.
already put in some problem solving before I say there's an impasse. I don't just use the impasse at the first sign of trouble, which it
Yeah,
wouldn't be like theoretically technically wrong. Like you could do it that way and just be like, oh, here's the first problem, impasse number one. Like you could phrase things that way, but it's like a strong word, and normally I just say like I'm finding what you're saying unclear or whatever, and talk about it in a more casual way.
yeah, and then only if it persists, uh,
Yeah,
which actually means that your impasse chain is longer than
longer.
5. There's just like
Yeah, I know.
unofficial ones in front of it.
Yeah, and that was
But I
like
think
the
that's
fifth conversation with Gavin or something.
yeah.
It wasn't his first chance.
I guess it's one of those things. After something like that happens, I imagine that it's sort of reasonable that uh like unless someone is going to try and engage you on like impasse chains and discuss a methodology, there's no real reason to actually ever have another conversation with them as such. Um, like that's the way back, I guess.
Yeah, people in general seem pretty hostile to um discussion methodology as a topic.
Yeah.
Which I don't know, I think it's a good topic. Like it's important. Critical rationalism says we learn by critical discussion. So like how do we have a critical discussion? What do we do? What are the right methods? How do we deal with problems? Like Popper says problem solving is all of life. So we should expect and that we should expect problems. Problems are inevitable. That's Deutsch, but I mean it's implied by Popper as well. So you
Mm.
should expect problems to come up in your critical discussions, and then you have to deal with them, and you need methods.
It's the chain of reasoning is particularly short as well. Like you could say, um, life is problem solving. Problems are inevitable. We solve problems by critical discussion. Like therefore, we should like put a lot of effort into figuring out this critical discussion thing and how to do it effectively. There's not a lot that like of prerequisite ideas before that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay, so two topic ideas I had for what to do next were try debating something else or talk about your big picture goals, which I think you were like planning to make a tree or write something about them a couple times, but didn't really get around to it.
there was a stuff about uh I'm not sure if this was no, this is discussion stuff. Um, and anyway, I wrote a thing. I'm pretty sure I copied it into one of the tutorial things. Um, yeah, I don't know. There was so I wrote like a bit of a draft that I was considering that if we wanted to, we could look at. Um, I guess so. It's a pretty early draft, but I think it's sort of like the argument is okay. Um, it sort of relates to the being convinced of something being wrong from small examples. Um, I don't know.
Is this hypothetical or is this a real conversation?
It's a hypothetical dialogue that I've just like typed out to make it
Okay.
easier to explain. Um, the claim is real though. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
I
pretty
read
quick.
the very
If we,
beginning. Dart guy seems a little silly. You can definitely, big companies have lots of projects they don't care very much about.
yeah, I guess I cared about this particularly because it's a programming language and like they've built a mobile UI framework thing around it called Flutter. Um, so if you're going to be making a mobile app, then the future of that app is in part tied to the future of the language. And I've been like burnt by languages before. Like Elm moved to 0.19 and like broke a bunch of my code such that it wasn't able to be fixed. Like that app is still on like 0.18, and that was like 3 years ago, and it's never getting off that. It's just in maintenance mode. Um, so it's sort of important for languages because if they're not serious about it, uh, dedicating resources to it is potentially a big waste of time or like a big mistake. So that's why I sort of had to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the specific case, but I find it completely plausible that they would make a language and not care much.
Yeah, the
Like,
thing that
when a big company cares about a new language they're making, it looks kind of like Swift. So if it looks absolutely nothing like Swift launch and support and marketing and so on, well, Google has a similar amount of resources to Apple, so you can tell that it's much less of a priority, assuming it's treated totally different.
I gather the team on Dart is like less than 10. I'm presuming that
Yeah,
Apple put more resources into Swift.
I have no idea how many people work on Swift, but probably more than 10, and it got a lot of like headlines and they invested in it and they like their own ecosystem, it makes a difference to them. Like they've convinced lots of iOS devs to switch to Swift. Um, they
Or
would
sort of
harm their
demanded it.
business in a big way if they stopped with Swift. Whereas with Dart, like could Google cancel it? Would it like ruin, I don't know, Android or search or something? Like they could probably
No,
just
it would just
cancel it,
mean
right?
some apps would not have a language, but the amount of stuff they write in Flutter, as I understand, is um pretty small.
Yeah. It's like Apple canceled 3D Touch. They no longer put that on their phones, but it was never like a major feature. I liked it. They disabled it in software on my phone that still has it, and it's kind of annoying because
Hmm.
some things that used to work stopped working with the iOS update. But anyways, the point is, like you can tell to a decent extent which are the major headline features they're definitely not going to change and fuck with, and what is, a decent sized thing, like the Ping social network Apple made. I think that was the name. That was kind of iTunes based. They tried to make
I'm
a
not
social network, and it was kind of oriented towards pop stars, like musicians. You'd like be able to follow your favorite musicians on iTunes, and I don't know, it failed and died after a few years or something. They put a
wow.
decent amount of
Too yeah.
effort into that, but it was still possible to be like, never mind. And that happens with big companies all the time. They can put quite a bit of effort into a project and then pull the plug before release or after release or whatever.
Hmm.
Like Google must like write off losses much larger than Dart, right? Like
Oh
they've done
yeah.
that on lots of other projects. So it's not safe.
Um. So I don't think I'm gonna find answers to how many people worked on Swift. I mean, Apple are generally pretty private about that stuff, but
Yeah,
I can't
they're
imagine it was.
especially.
Um. So the big thing that uh like really struck me as weird. Um. So like it's taken them more than 12 months to introduce this language feature called non-nullable. which literally is just the ability to guarantee that variables aren't null.
Yeah, that sounds like not a priority if something like that is not getting done for a year.
It was a priority for the team. That was they spent a year implementing it. They
Right.
had some other goals like not breaking code and being backwards compatible and stuff that does make it more complex. But I mean, this is a feature that you often get for free in stuff. Um, yeah, in other languages with strong type systems. So I mean, it started out as dynamic and then they added a type system onto it and stuff like this, which I think is just a terrible order to do things in. But
Yeah. Okay. So, sketchy project. Don't invest a huge amount of money in Dart apps.
yeah, it's a bit of a shame because some parts of it are really nice to work with. The language itself isn't amazing, but some things
Yeah.
about it are nice.
That relates to TOC and focus. Like, if you're unfocused and you have a bunch of projects, it's hard for third parties to rely on them. Like, you can only focus on a few, and then third parties can rely on those ones, probably, but not the other ones that you're not focusing on. Like, the ones you're not focusing on are less valuable because people can't build on them as safely.
Mm, yeah. Anyway, yeah, the core of the argument was just that like despite what someone says and what they do most of the time, it's like the exceptions that count more than the rules as such. Or like the exceptional actions that are more important for judging that whether they're serious or not than what they do 90% of the time. So I have this example about someone kicking a cat occasionally, but saying that they love cats. Um, yeah.
Okay, so do you want to try working on another debate or talking about goals, or do you have a different plan?
Um, well, I'm just thinking what's going to be so there's one thing that I'm starting to uh like teach someone in the business about blockchain stuff. Um, and we're recording this, well, we've recorded the first session, but planning on like streaming it to other people so they can watch if they want. Um, uh, I don't know if it'd be good to talk about that maybe. Just in terms of like I guess I don't know, tutoring methodology, I guess would be the topic. That's the only other
Yeah,
thing that really occurs to me
okay.
at the moment.
So, do you have like an outline, or can you quickly make one of like what is the person's role? What are what's their starting point? What outcomes are the goal? What's your plan to get there?
Um, yeah, okay. So let me just, I've got a Word doc. Let me just make sure it's not um, like whatever. So it's not particularly important that we look at it, um, or the first bit. But I started out by basically asking her what she already knew, and she had very basic knowledge in terms of there were some terms that she knew and there were some like related-y things. But yeah, but I did take a thing of the like the I guess the tree of the conversation as we went. Um, so yeah, so I can write out a bit of stuff um, on that if we want. Um, Um,
Is there a more specific goal? Like, is there a business goal here? Do you want them to be able
uh,
to create a certain product, or
well, just to be uh, like a developer who's able to contribute to these sort of projects. Um,
are there
like,
specific projects you have in mind? Or
uh, sort of. I mean, um, I don't
does
want to
your
talk in too much detail,
company
but
deal with like many different projects, so you just want them to be able to contribute and then like projects come along regularly?
yeah, that's part of it, and also that there's like a diversity of roles. So it's not as easy to codify like exactly what each uh like it's somewhat unpredictable what the particular thing would be in terms of doing stuff with
Okay, so there's an
yeah.
ongoing unknown work stream that usually has to do with blockchain, basically.
Yeah. That's well that's I mean that's close enough to be useful, I think. Um
Okay, do you have
yeah.
any requirements or obstacles that you know about? Requirements like a schedule.
So schedule wise it's just so I think at this point it's 3 days a week. It might end up being more. It's fairly free form though, and like within the context of work I'm pretty flexible on when we do stuff or stuff like that. Um, so there's no like strong contentious or strong requirements there. There's no particular time frame or stuff. It's probably going to be ongoing in a broader sense. Um, yeah. So it might.
Okay.
We don't need to get anything. Yeah,
That you've started already? Have you done like several sessions or
just one.
one? Okay. So have
So
you
it's
run into problems yet, or is it just going smoothly?
um, it's hard to know because it's going smoothly in the sense that we're like making progress and they say they're enjoying it. I guess it's I don't have a good way to judge that though. Like I don't know if we weren't making if it wasn't going smoothly, I'm not sure what situations I wouldn't know about that in. There are obviously some
Okay,
easier examples,
so you don't have
but yeah.
known problems to worry about.
Yeah, not at the moment. But yeah, only like one session for an hour is not a huge amount to go off, but I don't anticipate any particular problems either.
Okay, so do you have an outline of blockchain topics that you want to go through that organizes them?
Um, Not really. I imagine that we would get through more in the first session. So on that basis, I think it might be pretty like it would be easy for me to like overplan and uh assume too much progress, I guess is maybe what I'm saying. Um
I
the
didn't mean an outline like a schedule for what you get in each session. I meant
oh,
like
okay, yeah.
blockchain consists of, three major topic areas, and each of those consists of three major topic areas, and that's the
No, so
overall
I don't
picture.
um yeah, no, I've got no outline currently. Um
Okay, so I think that would help, so you could have a clearer idea of the big picture. Like, and there's other big picture things that are standard, like what problem does blockchain solve? What are the alternatives or rivals? Like, why was it created? What's it trying to improve on?
yeah, so that was sort of where we started where I asked them about the this like first or what they knew. Um and then figuring that principles are probably good was sort of what was the problem that it solved, and like at the first point at its introduction, what did it think it was solving, sort of thing. And so that sort of starts with like whoops, I don't know what happened there. um with like payments and going through the history of money essentially. So starting with barter and then introducing like how did like paper money come about. Coins are pretty easy to understand, precious metals, but then what happened there, and when did governments get involved, or what do they actually represent? What things were they based on originally that then got standardized and stuff like that? And that seems to be going reasonably well. You can sort of see there's a visual indication of the depth of topics there. Um,
Right, that's like background stuff. I don't know, is that stuff very relevant for the coding stuff he'll be doing?
um, Maybe it depends. Like coding is, or being able to be like an effective programmer is like one of the outcomes, but this I'm sort of going at it from a broader sort of thing as well, particularly because like I want one of the outcomes to be a like an ability to like think about these things in a broader sense without being constrained to like particular use cases or stuff. Um, like there are topics where you can get into coding blockchain stuff like in the first hour. Um, but people who go that route, I find, don't have good ways of thinking about things outside of that immediate scope. So like they're not able to like do very good
Yeah,
comparisons between different implementations or stuff
I
of
understand.
blockchains,
I
not that.
think the
Yeah.
causality there is different than your thinking. I think the causality is primarily that people self-select. Um, if they're interested in the broader thinking, then they're a lot more likely to start there. If they're not interested, then they'll jump into the practical details and stay there. So I don't think the route of learn some practical details first, and then it would be you could add on the broader stuff later if you wanted to. I don't think that route is inherently bad, um, but it's not as common.
Yep. Thinking about the self-selection idea as well, it's also probably the case that like my ability to like or the people that I'm basing that judgment off is also selective in that the only people I identify as people like that is like when people don't have that capability to do things more generally. Um, it's not that I don't think that like I don't think there's a problem with my initial stuff. It's just that people who like start out there but then get more general are not people that I'd like be able to pick up started there, if that makes sense. Yeah, sort of a sample
Yeah,
bias.
I think the getting more general thing is quite common for people who spend a very long time in the field. Like if they've been in the field for more than 10 years, even if they started really specific, they probably branched out a bit eventually.
Yeah, maybe one of the other problems with like people in blockchain currently is that like everyone's new. Um, in that the rate of growth is such that, I mean, I don't quite know what the actual like population type is. Um, but I mean, yeah, this will be in Christmas. I will have like spent 10 years doing stuff blockchain related. Um, and that's like, like it's rare to find someone who's got more than 12 months of sort of experience in stuff. Um, maybe 2 or 3
Right.
years is reasonably common now, but yeah. But it's so it's an interesting population, I guess, in terms of yeah, that progression. But yeah, I agree that an outline would help. I've got a general idea of where to go um next, which is once we sort of get to the problem that it's solving, to start thinking about the methods that it solved some problems as we like in parallel construct this toy blockchain. Um, which the actual data structure stuff is really straightforward. But like you just need lists essentially, um, and you can make the internal bits. It's fairly simple as a data structure. It's the other details that get more complex, and difficult to think about because they involve stuff like economics.
Okay, so some other tutoring stuff. One of the common problems is that people say they understand stuff that they don't understand. And they definitely don't do enough raising problems on their own initiative, like actually asking questions. Some people do, but most people do not. So it helps to try to ask questions yourself and test their understanding, or get them to try things or say things in their own words, or do something where if they don't understand it, that might actually get revealed.
Yeah. Um, so this is I mean I'll have more detail when after a few more sessions, but uh this is like one of the reasons that, or I guess the impetus behind uh like the style thus far, um like there's been a lot of silence to cut out, for example, in the first thing. Um style thus far has sort of been like, if I wanted to do this, what are the ways that I could do it? Or like what are the, you know, issues that someone would run into doing this? And so I'm, yeah, trying really hard not to give people answers they can repeat, I guess. Um yeah, it's I sort of feel like it's a bit risky in that if I do it badly, then it could just be frustrating, or like
Yeah, there's a common thing in school where teachers won't tell kids the answers. They'll just give them hints. And that often frustrates kids who are like, no, I want the answer to this one. I was having trouble with that. Like, they just want to know the answer, and then they can use that to figure out what was going wrong, and then they can practice on the next one. So, yeah, I think be really careful with holding answers that are useful. Like, if you think about it a certain way, and then you don't share that info, you're not giving them something that you find useful, for example.
yeah, okay. I mean, one thing that, like a question that um stuck out to, or I don't know if it really stuck out to me, but that came to mind just now, was that I was introducing the idea that uh like we are building up how money, like or paper cash came about. Um and as part of that, I was like, we were talking about like what are the ways that you could, instead of carrying around like a pot of gold when you wanted to buy something, what could you do? Is there something you could give to someone that wasn't money at the time, but that would like mean that you could essentially like take the thing home with you or whatever, or like, you know, agree on a price and do all the other things required with it. Um,
Yeah, have you read economics books on this?
some. So I particularly a few years ago, I read a probably about half a dozen books on like money creation and stuff.
Were they Austrian?
So yeah, predominantly. Bitcoin is like very pro-Austrian economics compared to anything else.
Okay. Did you read Theory of Money and Credit?
No.
How did you
Um,
pick? Were they like recent ones or something?
so some of them were recent. A lot like it was basically just stuff that I uh like that was either suggested or that some of them I went searching for. I'm trying to remember. I had some on Kindle, but I don't think they're on my current Amazon account, so I don't know where they've gone. Um,
Yeah, Theory
uh,
of Money and Credit by Mises is good, but I think it's long, and also I don't know how much other people repeated the same points later.
yeah.
So if you read more recent Austrian books, then it could potentially be repetitive because they took stuff from it. I don't know.
Um, I imagine there would be a bit of repetition, but I yeah don't think that it would be particularly like I imagine there's plenty I could learn from it. Um, the other stuff was like the books that I read were um like pretty uh often like the US like conversation around the US gold standard and stuff was a big topic of it. So it wasn't broad like it wasn't more broad in terms of uh I guess it's their scope. Um, they
Right.
were
I
pretty
believe this one deals with the origins of money somewhere.
um sort of oh, when you say origins of money, do you mean history or like the way that like money
I
comes
meant
into
the
existence today?
I meant the original origins, like how did money get invented? What problem does it solve? Why does money exist at all? But I think it also goes over paper money as well.
Oh yeah. Yep. It's like the role of like notes of credit or stuff like that, and pseudo bank check like things prior to proper standardized paper money and that sort of stuff.
Well, yeah, and why would gold be used as money, and how does that happen? And you could potentially trade seashells or something, and there's like the sort of original how this stuff starts and why it makes sense.
Yeah, okay. I don't have a good reason for why gold particularly. I mean, there are obviously qualities that it has over seashells, like space efficiency. Um, but I don't know why people have particularly agreed on it as a thing, as opposed to platinum or something. Um, I mean, now history is like the only reason I know of really. But
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
not sure. I don't know the specifics on like how many platinum mines there were, how available it was. Um, Platinum looks kind of similar to silver, right? So there could be a distinguishing it issue.
I think platinum was not known about for some time, like because it's a rarer metal. Um,
Hmm.
I'm not even sure if there are like um, that's not. So yeah, okay. So until 1820, Colombia was the only known source of platinum. So obviously, like gold being more
Yeah,
accessible around the planet helps a lot, or at least around Europe, before they started expanding out.
yeah. So that would definitely explain it because precious metals were a thing long, long before 1820.
Oh yeah. Well, I think like there was a lot of the terms. I'm not sure about terms actually, but a lot of the like techniques or things or that we learn about money counterfeiting are like from ancient Rome, like people shaving off the sides of coins to get like little bits of precious metals and then like boiling them down and making more coins or stuff. Um,
Yeah,
and that's actually where the ridges on the side of coins came from. Was one of the things like ancient Rome was because that was one of
right.
the ways to
That
prevent
makes
people doing
sense.
it. Um, yeah, there's lots of little things that I have picked up about that. The I guess yeah, for the purposes of blockchain stuff, it's not um like I don't think it's particularly important in terms of the details. Like the question why gold particularly isn't really related. It's just you know it's enough to know why not rice or seashells or stuff like that. Um,
Okay, yeah.
but
So,
yeah,
anyways, I was gonna say regarding telling people answers or repeatable lines or whatever. I think you should generally optimize first for what you think is useful or a good explanation or whatever, and optimize only secondarily for making it easier to test their understanding and detect errors. Like, do your best to teach and then worry about testing afterwards for a first approximation.
So
And
one
also,
thing
if
that
if you do
oh yep.
withhold something and then they're struggling or there's a problem or they want more help or whatever, then you can just tell them and find a different way to test them rather than like uh sticking to it.
So one thing that I am sort of curious about in with this stuff and the kids thing reminded me of. So like teachers, in terms of the giving hint stuff and what you were pointing out, I think it's probably like it's easier to see how that applies in something like maths where there's like you can generate lots of problems. But for other things like thinking about, like uh why would um like paper money have been particular, something like that. It feels like there's more stuff where you can't, like the answer is the learning as opposed to an exercise you can do to practice or improve. Um
Okay, so if if someone needs to learn a method and it's a repeatable method that you use on many things like the math case, then telling them a few answers is fine because they can just practice with other ones. If it's not a method, if they're just learning a specific single thing, then you tell them it and then they have the whole answer. That's okay too because it's not a method. They don't need to learn an underlying method, they just need to learn the thing. If you tell them the thing and then they know it and remember it and can repeat it, then you've solved the problem. If they actually need to understand something other than being able to repeat a certain sentence, um, if there's some deeper understanding that you need, then you can test for that by asking questions that try to get at it. Like either the thing that they're saying contains all the information they need, or it doesn't, and whatever is left out you can separately ask something about.
yeah, so I might be making some mistakes because I don't have a lot of experience with like how people learn outside of myself. And I might be trying to structure things in such a way that it would like that it fits my impression of what I've experienced in the past. Um, yeah, so I don't know. Some of the things associated with that are like uh, r- realizing something and uh, like having a big shift in what I think because of it. Um, Sort of like a eureka moment type thing, but there's like uh, big expansive things or whatever, and I'm maybe mistaking like the creative process in learning for that sort of thing. Um, I don't know, it's hard to describe. Um, yeah, but the one of the sort of outcomes is I might be withholding too much. Um, and it also sort of maybe says that if I am withholding for something like this where I'm like looking for a deeper understanding, I might need to be more explicit about what that deeper understanding is. Um,
Yeah.
because if I'm not clear on that, then I can withhold something without purpose, and that would be bad. And also frustrating and arbitrary, like it doesn't actually do the thing that I want it to anyway, then, even if they do happen to guess. There's also, I think it's a bad experience when people like feel like they've given you an answer and you just didn't take a synonym for the answer. Um,
Yeah.
so there are other times where it makes sense. Like I asked, so there was the question, what can you give someone besides money that would potentially like help solve this? Um, and I was looking for promise or a synonym of promise. Um, Actually, this is sort of a thing in that if I'm asking a question like that and they say gold, then it's sort of obvious they're not making the right sort of progress. Whereas if they said like a contract, that would be pretty much the same thing as a promise. Which I think maybe it was something like contract was the answer that was given for that. I can't quite remember, but or an agreement or something. No, I think actually no. I think I was just a bit of an asshole at that point because I've got vocal contract between there. Oh, we actually talked about that. We went down that, and then I was like, I something to pay you back.
Yeah, yeah. Contract versus promise is pretty similar.
I think the only reason I stuck with that then was because I like had this bit that it was like, what's a word that fits in there? Because I sort of wanted to get to a more like a bigger picture than just a contract sort of thing, something that's more general.
Yeah,
But
you
yeah.
can actually put the word contract in there. Like, I contracted to pay you back. Contract can be a verb.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's true.
The verb.
But yeah,
So yeah.
I don't
Because
think I've
your particular sentence was the main thing it needed was a verb rather than a noun to make the
yes, yeah,
slot work.
yep. Um, yeah, I agree to pay you back would work as well. Anyway, yeah. So I don't think that was a big like issue in the session, but it's something for me to consider in whatever in future.
Yeah,
Um,
in general, I would say put some trust in the learner, and if they want something, just give it to them and try to be helpful. Like, think of yourself a bit less as the authority and the guide and whatever, and a bit more as the helper,
mm,
and the facilitator.
yep. Um,
And if you run into a specific problem, like they're sort of parroting things and you're not really understanding it, or there's some underlying method that they're not getting, you can try to figure out how to deal with it when you identify that there's a problem. Or
yep.
if you suspect, you can test for it or whatever. Or just test in general without being suspicious just because testing's good. But yeah, the point is, start just trying to help, and then if there's a problem, deal with it. And you can't ruin the ability to deal with the problem later. Like, nothing, there's no information that you give them where you can no longer deal with problems later. You can't screw that up.
Yep.
You can screw up particular tests. Like, you can be a teacher who already wrote the test in advance last year and then wants to give the same test and can't spoil the particular questions that happen to be on it, or they have to do more work. But you can't screw it
Yeah.
up for real where there's no way to make a new test.
So I was thinking, yeah, spoilers were the first thing that come to mind. I mean, you use that word in the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought I just had quickly before the end. So one thing that I do, so and I guess like this stuff, or like the method I'm using at the moment, is in some ways deliberately to avoid doing this problem, which is like going too fast or talking at the wrong level of emergence or um,
Oh
essentially
yeah.
like often I'll like rush to get to a conclusion or something like that as opposed to doing the right foundational work.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that I thought of earlier. A very common teaching issue is going too fast because things are clearer and easier to you than they are to the other person.
Mm.
And usually teachers take that into account some, like they make an adjustment for it, but the adjustment is more often too small than too big.
Yes, yeah. Well, the other thing, if it's too big, it's usually easier to tell from like someone getting bored or like being like, yep, 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 or like interrupting you before the end of your sentences or something. Consistently would be a sign of that. So it's easier to correct for being too big than too small. Um, One thing I am, it's a lot of people have a more passive learning style than like I enjoy conversations, and so um, I I enjoy talking about the thing, and so I
Yeah, people
yeah
can be
maybe have
too
trouble when
passive
people
if
don't.
you're making it too easy as well. You don't necessarily get feedback. But yeah, it's easier for them to give feedback if they're not confused. So if it's too easy, then they're not confused. If it's too hard, then they are confused, and they're going to be more confident when they're not confused, so you do have a better chance at feedback.
Yep. Cool.
Um,
All right.
so for next time, I would suggest that you think about and write something about your goals, bigger picture goals, both in life and for tutoring going forward, what you want to do next or work on.
Yes. Yep. No,
Does
that
that
sounds
sound
good.
good? Okay.
Yep. If we get through that, we've got a debate topic or something to go on with, which is general but not urgent or anything. This sounds good. Cool. All right.
Okay.
See you in 3 days.
Yep. Bye.